Hi, everyone. It's really an honor to have Alex Traiman with me back here. If you remember, the last time we spoke, we were literally in a makeshift studio on a street corner in Jerusalem. And it's an honor to have you, Alex. Alex is the CEO and Jerusalem Bureau Chief of the JNS. And we have a lot to talk about today. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
So, before we get started with a number of questions that I have for you, give us an update. What's going on? What do we have to know?
Well, I mean, what the IDF has been going nonstop in Gaza. The ground incursion's been moving methodically and yet also extraordinarily efficiently. The results thus far have been very, very good. The IDF's taken over a quarter of the Gaza Strip so far. They've done their utmost to prevent civilian casualties, doing more than any army in the history of warfare has ever done to make sure that civilians are out of the way, to ensure their passage to safer areas. And it's there's fighting on the northern border as well, hoping that it doesn't morph into full-fledged multi-front conflict, but it seems like it's almost there already. And potentially on the brink of seeing the return of some hostages in exchange for what's being called a humanitarian pause. We're waiting for more information about what that could look like.
Is there any information about the hostages?
Well, we're not getting in the press much information about hostages, just that potentially that the hostages that could be released are American citizens, or at least half of them are American citizens, and probably the others women and children.
When I was in the South and talking to soldiers there, there were two things that I heard about the hostages. The first thing I heard is we personally, and this is what I heard from soldiers on the ground, we personally can't be concerned about the hostages because it impairs our ability to do what we have to do of getting rid of Hamas. That was the first thing I heard. The second thing I heard is that the hostages are are not all known, which means Hamas doesn't even know where they are because a lot of them were taken by civilians. Do you know anything? Do you echo that statement to the soldiers? Do you know anything more than that?
Yeah, that's true. We saw on October 7th, in addition to the, so-called militants, the ones that were dressed in military style gear, with weapons that came across on motorcycles, there was also hundreds, if not thousands, of civilians that poured into Israel once the border was open or once they heard that Hamas was coming in, and they also participated in the kidnapping. We saw the rescue of Ori Megladish, the first IDF rescue of hostages. And, as it turns out, she was not in the tunnels, she was in a home. And so it's a good indication, like you said, that they don't know where all the hostages are located. I mean, that's part of the strategy, was to spread out where the hostages are located. They don't want there to be an Entebbe style rescue where, the IDF special forces just come in and all of a sudden rescue 200 hostages. They're spread all throughout the strip, and many of them are probably located here in Gaza City, which the IDF has been encircling for days, and is now basically placed under siege and is starting to enter into the town. But
Eh,
I want to answer your first point also about the soldiers and how they treat hostages. And there's actually IDF doctrine which says that if you are a soldier and you see somebody else being taken as a hostage, and you are not in position where you can kill the terrorists and preserve the life of the hostage, you kill the hostage.
wow.
Because a hostage is, it's the worst situation, and you try to prevent the hostage situation. And certainly Israel has special forces and diplomatic channels all working on releasing the hostages. But in terms of the IDF mission, like these soldiers told you, the IDF has to move ahead as if there are no hostages, and have to assume that the hostages are not going to come back, even while at the same time getting the hostages back is a primary objective. It's a duality that the IDF needs to work with. They need to finish the job, without worrying about hostages. to prevent any more hostages from ever being taken
Right.
again.
Of the five hostages, four that were released and one that was found, has there been any information that was gleaned from them? Because I haven't heard anything of information that was gleaned.
Well, you're intentionally not hearing any information because any information could change the whereabouts of the hostages. If all of a sudden it gets released that the IDF knows that certain hostages are in certain places, those hostages could be moved.
Right.
So you don't want to be sharing any information that you might be getting.
Right. Is there any other information that we're not getting on this side of the world that you think is important for us to know with regards to the current conflict and situation?
Well, from what I can see in most of the mainstream media, the the talking points are just about how many civilian casualties there are in Gaza, and that there's over 10,000 civilian casualties according to the Gaza Health Ministry. Well, the Gaza Health Ministry is an organ of Hamas. Okay, there was an attack that was reported on a hospital on October 17th, where the Gaza Health Ministry said that the IDF had struck a hospital in the Gaza Strip and killed 500 people. It was within minutes debunked that it wasn't the IDF that hit it, that it was an errant Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket that was actually targeted towards Haifa. And not only was it an errant rocket, but it didn't actually hit the hospital. It hit the parking lot outside of the hospital after midnight. And so the question is, well, how many people do you think were standing in the parking lot of the hospital after midnight? And there's been reports that maybe up to 20 people were killed in that blast, if that much. But the CNN, BBC, New York Times, AP, they all ran with the Reuters, they all ran with the story that the IDF killed hundreds when they struck a hospital. And then there was an IDF strike on a refugee camp in Gaza called the Jabalia refugee camp. And it was reported again that 400, 500 people were killed in this blast. And you could see that the blast site was much larger than other blast sites in the area. And the IDF said, well, they actually didn't hit it with more weaponry than other areas. And yet they reported that underneath this refugee camp was a massive weapons depot. So you're talking about all kind of secondary explosions that took place. And then people reporting that the ground was collapsing under them. Why? Because there are tunnels underneath that were collapsed in these secondary explosions where these weapons were. And the reports came out after this that again maybe a few dozen people were killed and not hundreds. So first, to know that the Gaza Health Ministry is an organ of Hamas, they want to report maximum number of civilians killed. In those numbers is not indicated how many people are actually Hamas fighters or terrorists that were killed, right? We just know 10,000 people killed, but how many of them were legitimate military targets fighting against the IDF when they were killed. And you also don't know how many of those might have been killed by errant rockets. Over 500 rockets at least are reported to have fallen inside the Gaza Strip, and people, they forget, because Israel shoots these rockets out of the sky with the Iron Dome, which is amazing technology and also miraculous. The number of people that have been killed on the Israeli side of the border from close to 10,000 rockets fired has been very few. You can count them on your fingers. Each one of those rockets could kill dozens of people. Okay. The fact that Israel shoots them out of the sky doesn't mean that they can't kill dozens of people. And the fact that dozens of people haven't been killed in any of the 400 times when those rockets actually hit the ground, that's a miracle. Okay. If that rocket hits in Gaza, it could kill dozens of people. And it's happened over 500 times. So again, there's no way to trust these numbers, but also to understand that Hamas wants you to think that Israel's killing the maximum number of civilians when, like I said before,
Right.
they're doing everything in their power to make sure that civilians aren't being killed. It's a horrific double standard that's actually being imposed on the IDF to worry about the civilians when they're attacking an enemy that embeds itself in a civilian population.
To echo what you're saying, when I was talking to members of Zaka, the unit that goes around collecting the remains and identifying the victims of terror, they said that it's a month already and they can't even give proper numbers. Though
Exactly.
when I see Hamas is very easy within minutes to give
Minutes.
numbers.
Right. Minutes.
It's unbelievable. So it seems to me that it's almost impossible for them to actually have even semi-accurate numbers.
And if you think about it, when you consider the amount of damage that the IDF has actually laid in the Gaza Strip, the number of military targets that they've hit, the fact that Hamas has not allowed civilians to move out of the north in as large numbers as you would have expected should have moved. The fact that only 10,000 would be dead in these circumstances is actually a tremendous accomplishment for the IDF, but it's very likely that that number is significantly lower, maybe half. We have no way of knowing for sure, but yet still the entire world is up in arms over the humanitarian disaster that Israel has caused, you know, because of the old adage that it all started when he hit me back, after the horrific massacre on October 7th. So now the humanitarian crisis is Israel's fault because it responded to this declaration of war.
To that, here in North America, we are fighting a battle, as I'm sure you're aware of, a battle of public opinion. My, I'll just talk about my personal Facebook page. My personal Facebook page has had a little over 2,500 new followers in the past 3 weeks of Muslim names, clear Muslim names, and they literally just will attack my posts. And I'm sure you're getting this on yours, and I can't imagine if I'm getting this, how many others are getting this, and it's just a barrage. I have censored something like 30 or 40,000 posts at this point on my own personal Facebook page. At first, actually, I kept them on because I wanted people to bear witness as to the hostility and the harassment that people such as myself are getting, and then I decided to censor them and take them off. Um, why do you think no matter what we do, no matter what we do, A, we're getting harassed, and B, there's no way that we can win the media war?
That's right. I mean, we already see that the mainstream media is essentially mouthpiece for Hamas. That's how could it be, like we said before, that the AP, Reuters, BBC, CNN, New York Times would, within minutes, just take those claims that the IDF had killed 500 in a strike on a hospital when A, it wasn't the IDF, B, it didn't hit the hospital, and C, 500 people were not killed, right? Not one part of that story was true, but the entire mainstream media ran with that. Um, Actually, the JNS, my publication, was the first publication to officially report that officially confirmed that it was not an IDF strike, because we were in real time contact with the IDF spokesperson and with the Prime Minister's office and begging them to get a statement out as fast as possible. But the difference here, like between the IDF and and Hamas here, is that when we were begging the spokesperson to give us an official report statement saying that they didn't do it, when there was already rumors that they might not have been responsible, they said, well, you don't understand, we have to check everything. You can imagine the number of different posts that they
Right.
had to check where fire could have come from, and then they had to check all the surveillance footage and everything, and it took them time. So when you are when you want to report accurately, so that takes time, and when you're willing to broadcast lies, you can do that in a second. And so when you have the advantage of speed, how can you rebut that the IDF didn't hit the hospital before the hospital was hit? You can't preempt what lies are going to come out next. So you have lies, you have the mainstream media, you also have the algorithms. We're seeing reports on TikTok, for example, that the number of pro-Palestinian posts via the algorithm are exponentially greater than pro-Israel posts. So you're fighting algorithms also. And then situation I know that you're very aware of over the last several decades has just been the amount of anti-Semitism on the college campuses. how it's been enabled to fester there. I mean, I remember just working as a recruiter for long-term volunteer programs in Israel in early 2000s and starting to see the first instances of the Israel Apartheid Week and the apartheid walls popping up on the campus, and the Jewish community, not wanting to tackle this head on, not demanding that the university presidents put a stop to this practice. And this has been allowed to fester. You have situations in which Qataris and Saudis have been funding Middle East programs at universities, particularly Title VI universities. And that's important because in the United States, a Title VI university receives federal funding in order to provide educational materials to public schools. So elementary schools and high schools have been essentially had their textbooks written, with Qatari funds and Saudi funds, in the years before Saudi started to moderate itself. And even back when I was in college, we started to see on social media, and not before social media, on right in the beginning of YouTube, you'd look at the video and then you scroll down below the video and you would see the comments below the video. It was already vile anti-Semitism then. Same thing on Yahoo News. You'd see the article
Right.
coming from the AP. You scroll down on the bottom, you pay attention to the comments. I was sensitive to this back then. A lot of people weren't, but you'd see the anti-Semitism was already there, and it was a little bit under the surface. It wasn't above the fold. It was below the article, but it was already there. And so when you have all of these different components allowed to fester and grow, it's not a surprise that when the real conflict happens, like started in October, that this entire mechanism, which has been primed for this moment, really wasn't able to let all this anti-Semitism boil to the surface.
Yeah. This is a huge issue here, huge, and obviously on campus it's become hostile, but even not on campus, my 2-year old, he's infatuated with his kippahs, and he was walking on Friday night with a young woman in our community to shul, and someone spit at him and said Allah Akbar. 2-year-old, a 2-year-old walking with a kippah. And this
Yes.
is this is the reality of what's going on here. And I mean, you obviously have a very different take to it. People here are living in fear. What do you have to say to them?
Well, I mean, we saw the shooting in the Pittsburgh synagogue. We saw the shooting in the Poway synagogue in San Diego. Um, this is reality. I mean, I visit the state several times a year. I go to synagogue. The amount of security that they have outside these synagogues now, and you have, congregants, wearing the earpieces in their ears, and the fences in front of the synagogues. I mean, it's this is the reality in the United States now. I mean, and if we think it's bad now, we're only starting to see what this manifestation looks like. The people that were on the college campuses 20 years ago, like I was discussing back then, now they're teaching college courses. Now they're teaching high school. Many of them are now in the halls of Congress. Okay.
Right.
Joe Biden, I think he's 81 years old. He came to Israel. He expressed his support for it, for the Jewish state. He sent over USS carrier groups to protect Israel, and despite any amount of pressure they might be putting on Israel, which is a totally separate topic, we could discuss it later or whatever. But this is he's represents the end of this old guard of Democrats that supported Israel for generations and have been with Israel through numerous conflicts, including the Yom Kippur War in 1973, 50 years ago. And you can only imagine that the next president from the Democratic Party is not going to be as favorable towards Israel as Joe Biden is, because this is what they've been taught, in their education system. And it's horrific because it's morality versus immorality. I mean, what Hamas did, this is terrorism. This is the Islamic State. This is barbarism. It's not. There was no military objective here. The military objective was to draw Israel into a conflict so that Israel would do as much damage in Gaza as it possibly could, so it could delegitimize Israel in the public sphere as it's doing. That was the goal. So, this is a
Yeah.
situation, but I think that anti-Semitism in North America is just going to continue to be a major problem. I don't really see how it gets better in the short term.
Yeah, I agree with that. Going back to my initial question, is there anything that people here can do? Do we engage? Do we talk, or is there just no hope for the haters are going to hate? What do we do? Is there a silent majority that we should be speaking to?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's a good idea of being brave and going into the crowds and trying to shout down people that are spewing hatred. I mean, you do see videos of that sometimes, and wow, these are incredibly brave people. But we just saw a 60-something-year-old man die in a protest in Los Angeles. Apparently, he got hit over the head and died of a head injury. I mean, it's dangerous out there,
What
but what
about
you
social media?
Sure, social media, it's a little bit safer, but I think you have to really try to convince those that can be convinced right now, because there's the vocal angry minority. They cannot be convinced. There's no amount of facts that you're going to bring, because this is a completely emotive argument, and they've taken their decision before they've had any facts to back it up, and they don't want to be confused with your facts. But there are people that are looking, and they haven't made firm decisions, and I think those people, you should talk to people about it, and you should strengthen. And also, Israel needs, and the Jewish people need to see that people care. That's
Right.
so important. The
I
the
think
unity
that's really
factor
important.
is a major factor. So if you can use your social media, as a force for demonstrating unity and encouraging others to demonstrate unity, I think that's one of the most powerful forces that you can use right now. And to be frank, I think that one of the major problems in the run up to October 7th was a tremendous amount of disunity among Jewish people here in the state of Israel, disunity between the diaspora and the state of Israel. And unfortunately, this is what it takes to restore unity, but it is a tremendous opportunity to restore unity, and it would be a wasted opportunity if we didn't do everything that we could to reestablish unity. So if you can use social media and talking to others, and gathering people together, and encouraging them. Also, positive energy is so important right now as the soldiers are fighting a war. So, there's a
Absolutely.
lot of things I think that, putting positive and unifying messages out in every possible way is extraordinarily important.
I love that message of positive and unifying messages. I really think that right now that is what our job is. Our job is not to spread hate. Our job is not to necessarily spread the news. I mean, your job is to spread the news, but our job, especially from a social media perspective, and here in Canada, we cannot share any media, right? For on our social media, that's banned here. But just to be able to share that love and that support is such an important thing. I want to ask you a couple of questions, and I think these are difficult questions, but they get to the core of what's going on and some of the rhetoric that we're hearing. So, the term anti-Semitism has been used for centuries to refer to people who hate Jews, and many people know that. Though right now, a lot of people who are pro-Palestinian, they are calling themselves Semites, and they're using the word anti-Semitism to their benefit, saying we're also being anti or being Islamophobic is also anti-Semitic. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, that's not what historically it's been used for, and everyone knows the word anti-Semitism. Well, guess what? There's a whole new generation. Not everyone knows that today. Do you think that we should stop using the word anti-Semitism and start using the word Jew hatred?
Yeah, I got that question several times in the last few days. I mean, I think it's it it's okay to do that. I think that that's definitely an approach. I think you'd have to actually focus test it and see if that's effective. And there's ways of doing that. I think what's funny about the whole anti-Semitism is that Israel gets accused of being not Semitic, right? And is
That's
accused
right.
of itself of being anti-Semitic. On the one hand, Israel is accused of being like these white occupiers, colonists, even though more than half the population is Sephardi in Israel, is the Jews that came from Arabic countries essentially. Yeah. Um, and yet and yet now you see other Semitic peoples, trying to co-opt the anti-Semitism. I mean, you could call it whatever you want. It is Jew hatred.
But
Um,
when we perpetrate the word anti-Semitism, we're using that ourselves. Do you think it's working against us
I
because
don't know
of
that it's the word working against us. I mean, you have to think about like what are the root causes of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is beyond all logic. There's no logic that explains anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is ultimately a spiritual disease, right? And so you have to think about why is there anti-Semitism in the world? So first of all, like what's the role of the Jewish people? The role of the Jewish people is to bring down light, to teach Torah and godliness, to the world, and to be a source of positivity, to unite together, to be 12 tribes that sit as together as one nation. And so, on the one hand, when the Jewish people don't fulfill their spiritual role in the world, so the nations of the world get angry at the Jews. They're
right,
they're right to be angry. They just don't know why. Uh, and so it's misplaced anger, but God's sending a message. When Jewish people think that there are distinctions between one Jew and another Jew, so anti-Semites are there to tell you, no, a Jew is a Jew is a Jew is a Jew. The Nazis, they didn't care if you were a Reform Jew or if you were an Orthodox Jew or if you were politically conservative or if you were pro-socialist or Marxist or like they didn't care. Right? A Jew is a Jew is a Jew. So when Jews make distinctions between themselves, so then all of a sudden anti-Semitism comes up to say, no, a Jew is a Jew is a Jew, which is what Jews should have known to begin with. The other
right.
thing is that if anti-Semitism is a spiritual disease, so what is the spiritual center of the world? What where?
I see it behind you,
Right.
Jerusalem.
Right. And the spiritual center of the world in Jerusalem is exactly what you see behind me right here, which is the Dome of the Rock, the place where the Jewish temple stood. Okay. And a phenomenon that about the Jewish temple was that the windows in the temple were smaller on the inside and larger on the outside, which is which is counterintuitive because if you want to let more light into the room, they would be smaller on the outside and larger on the inside to allow the light to shine in. Except in the temple was reversed. Why? Because the light of the temple, the spiritual light, was supposed to shine outward. Okay. It's from this place that spirituality is broadcast to the entire world. So when you're on the Temple Mount now, if you go up there on a Friday, so the spiritual message is coming from the Imam inside the Al Aqsa Mosque. And the sermon that's being broadcast there is a sermon that is filled with anti Semitism. Okay. So if anti Semitism is being broadcast from the spiritual center of the world, why are we shocked or surprised when we see anti Semitism spreading to every corner of the globe?
Right, right. So you think it's not an issue of semantics, but rather it's an issue of value.
Yeah. Semitics and semantics.
That's funny. That's
Yeah.
funny. Um, you touched on this just a few minutes ago. Very often, a lot of the Jew hating people talk about the occupiers. They use the Holocaust reference. You and I both, though, I mean, for me, 23andMe says I'm 99.7% Ashkenazi Jewish. I don't look so Semitic, right? I don't look like a typical Jew as far as the certain color and what Semitism is. Don't you think we should maybe? And you also said something that's so important, that majority of the Jews of Israel are Mizrahi. They are of Arab descent, so to speak. Don't you think that maybe we should change the narrative from the Holocaust to be telling the story of Israel through the lens of the Mizrahi Jews?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the Mizrahi Jews are such an important part of the story of Israel. They're what makes Israel Israel. I think if they keep Israel closely tied to its traditional values. I mean, even if they themselves are not always very stringent in the observance, still you have people like in the street where I live in Jerusalem. It's mostly Mizrahi Jews. They're not all Sabbath observant, but you know what? The men show up in the synagogue on Friday night. They go home, they make a kiddush, and they have a Friday night dinner. They might be watching soccer afterwards, but it's still Shabbat to them, and
Right.
it's still important, and they're maintaining it. And in a lot of cases, unfortunately, it's these Ashkenazi more liberal Jews are willing to let go of the traditions and the values. So yeah, people talk about ethnic cleansing, genocide. Israel was born on the backs of the worst genocide of modern era in the last 100 years, the Holocaust, 6 million Jews killed, and also the worst ethnic cleansing where you had 850,000 Jews expelled from countries all across the Middle East and North Africa. And not only that, but the Jewish people are indigenous. You talked about your DNA. I did my DNA. My DNA shows that on my father's line that goes back to the Saudi Peninsula. Okay.
Mine too. Mine too. Yeah.
Right. So, the Jewish people are the indigenous people in the land of Israel.
And
Okay.
we've always been there. People think that we came from Europe. Yeah, we were
Right.
exiled because we had no choice, but we've always been in Israel.
And,
We've
and,
always
one of
been in
the
that land.
one of the big failures, in the last several years, I remember I was at a conference with you 5 years ago of students in college campuses, and they were dealing with anti-Semitism, and I had to like open up my Urban Dictionary to hear about new words that I never knew before, like intersectionality, and I was like, what is that? And I'm looking it up, and the Jewish people in the state of Israel should be the model of intersectionality. What happens to a persecuted class of people that were kicked out of their indigenous homeland? The state of Israel should be the ultimate model for what you do with the persecuted class of people, and you return them to their indigenous homeland. And instead, like somehow or another, the Jewish people got played out of that narrative. We've allowed ourselves to get played onto the wrong side of our own story, uh,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
it's a terrible failure. You asked me about anti-Semitism. I just want to tell you the sad truth is that the narrative warfare and the violent anti-Semitism, it's all going to get much worse, I promise, if Israel does not win this war. If Israel does not win the war conclusively, comprehensively, beyond any shadow of a doubt, where Hamas and everybody else says, yeah, Israel won the war. That's it.
So
Then the situation is going to get much, much worse. And it's only if Israel wins this war that I think that Israel will be able to reclaim some of the narrative, because if you don't win the war, then the war was unjust. If you win the war and you remove Hamas from the face of the earth, then you can claim that what you did was just.
I, based on that, how can you truly expect that Hamas is not going to return to power after the dust settles?
Well, I mean, this is complicated. I mean, if you ask me, I think the most important thing that needs to happen, number one, is that the Rafah border crossing gets opened up, and that everybody that wants to leave the Gaza Strip gets to leave. I know that this is counter to the narrative that's being sown by the Egyptians, the Jordanians, and the Americans and the
They said
Europeans.
it's a red line.
Right. Now, every war zone in the history of warfare, you've had people that try to flee the war zone and they are refugees and they get to leave and they get to be resettled elsewhere. 13 million refugees were resettled from Syria just to the north of Israel during the horrific civil war in the last period. Israel has accepted over 35,000 refugees from Ukraine just in the last year or year and a half, whatever it is. Um, and yet Gazans aren't being allowed to leave. I think the most important thing that needs to happen is that people that want to leave Gaza get to leave, because I promise you that after the IDF's done doing what it's doing inside Gaza, the situation there is going to be much, much, much worse than it was. If people were saying that it was an open air prison before, like it's going to be a ransacked prison, afterwards. And so people need to leave. The IDF is doing the job of going basically door to door at this point, removing weapons, destroying tunnels, taking away all the infrastructure, going after the leadership of Hamas. And what has to happen is that a price has to be exacted that is so large and so comprehensive that not only does Hamas no longer have the military capability to to perpetrate the type of violence that they did on October 7th, but there's no more motivation to ever do that again. The deterrent factor has to be so great. And the other thing is that the IDF, is Prime Minister Netanyahu said yesterday, is going to have to stay there for an indefinite period of time, because I know this runs counter to every narrative that's being promoted out there about Israel and the IDF and military occupation and everything like that. But when Israel is in control of the territory, life is better for Israelis and life is better for the Palestinians that live there. Okay. Israel left the Gaza Strip in 2005. Okay. They gifted it over to the Palestinian Authority. Within 2 years, Hamas had taken over the Strip, had kicked out the Palestinian Authority. The IDF wasn't there. And over the years, Hamas has built up rocket capacity, imported weapons, assault rifles, RPGs, IEDs, explosive devices, and built this 500 plus kilometer long tunnel network, underneath the Strip. And the IDF was unable to do anything about it. They would fire rockets. The IDF would fire back. The international community would call for a ceasefire. You'd have 6 months of quiet. And then this would just play itself out again and again, each time Hamas getting stronger and stronger and stronger. In Judea and Samaria, which is commonly known as the West Bank, most of the territory controlled by the Palestinian Authority. Okay, even in areas like Area A, where the IDF is not technically supposed to operate, the IDF goes in and out whenever a terror organization or terror organ pops up. The IDF goes in and they remove it. They pull out the weeds of terror. And even though there's been terrorism for sure in Judea and Samaria, you don't have a situation in Judea and Samaria like you have in Gaza, where they can perpetrate such a war against the Jewish people. And then if you take it one step further, the Arabs that live inside Israeli territory proper, like the 250,000 Arabs that live in Jerusalem or in the mixed cities like Ramla, Lod. Yes, we saw riots a couple of years ago. There is definitely an increase in the amount of assault rifles that we're seeing in these areas, but it's much less than Judea and Samaria, and it's much less than in Gaza. So the more presence of the IDF and Israeli administration of the territory, the safer it is, both for Jews and for Arabs. And not only is it safer, but also the economic, the standard of living for the Arabs goes up incrementally with more and more Israeli control.
Yeah, thank you. This leads me to my next question, actually, about the Israeli economy. A lot of very well-intentioned, good-hearted people here are worried about the suffocating of the Israeli economy and ensuring that the agricultural crops are not being, are being properly maintained. And so, what do you know about that, and what's going on?
Well, I mean, the economy is definitely taking a hit. I just saw figures just right before this call that the deficit in November is significantly higher than it was in October, just because of all the war spending. 200,000 Israelis are displaced right now, and the IDF, the Israeli government is essentially paying for them to be housed in hotels and
Yeah,
other arrangements,
I
and
saw
it's
that myself when I was there. Yeah,
extraordinarily expensive, and the government's just paying for that. At the same time, you have 300,000 soldiers called up, including reservists that have not been at work for a month now. And so there's definitely an economic slowdown, but the foundations of the Israeli economy are strong, and remain strong. And Israel was in good financial position coming into this crisis. Even though the deficit's much higher now, the deficit is low. I mean, the deficit, Israel was running almost a balanced budget, before
wow,
this started. So unfortunately, yeah, is a toll on the economy. Yes. Are the foundations of the economy strong? Very. And this is it's imperative on Israel to win this war conclusively and to win it as fast as possible to get the
right,
economy rolling again. If Israel wins the war, then and sentiments towards Israel are high, you'll see a lot of investment back into the Israeli economy. If somehow Israel messes up the war, I think you could see renewed calls for sanctions against Israel, and we
yeah,
don't even want to think about it. But yeah, for so many different reasons, including anti-Semitism, including the economy, including the security of Israeli citizens. Israel has one choice in this war, and that's to win fast, to win conclusively and comprehensively.
It's amazing how you and so many others I've spoken to are saying exactly the same thing. They have to get in, they have to win. This has to be successful. They don't really have a choice. Yeah.
Without a doubt. Yeah.
Here's another. I mean, I'm going to go through some of the questions that people here are asking. Somebody says here, I've seen reports about the Jewish settlers committing unprovoked violent acts against Palestinians. Are these isolated incidents? If not, is the government doing everything possible to ensure that they do not initiate any criminal activity? People here are very worried about that.
Sure. Few things to know about it. First of all, is it settlers that are perpetuating this violence? That's an important question. In some cases, you might see a fire be set to a house or a car in a Palestinian neighborhood, and then they say that it was perpetrated by settlers. Is that the case? Is that part of the psychological warfare game of making the settlers who, I'm sure a lot of quote unquote settlers that live in settlements, probably the nicest, sweetest people that with
They
big,
are.
beautiful families and with incredible values.
I went to the
Just
shiva of the mayor of Paltiel. He lost his daughter in Sderot for a rocket attack, and I went to the shiva there. I mean, the sweetest, nicest people.
right. So, like, are these the type of people that are like perpetuating violence against others? It's the
Right.
opposite. The settlers are the ones that say over and over again, unlike many other Israelis, no, we can live with them, we can coexist with them. Look, we shop together with them, we work together with them. They come into our communities, they build our houses. Okay, so that to understand like who the settlers actually are, they're nice Jews. They like suburban living, and in many cases, not far from Israeli population centers. It's not like we're talking like out in the boondocks. It could be 10, 15 minutes away from Jerusalem or 20 minutes away from Tel Aviv is these settlements, right? So that's one. Two, in a lot of cases, it might be the IDF that was actually operating against terrorists. And if you have bearded IDF soldiers or religious soldiers, they say, well, it's the settlers, the
Right.
settler army, right? So that can also be accused on settlers. And now let's take the case in which there are known cases in which settlers have taken action against Palestinians. Was that unprovoked? Were there not inordinate number of provocations time and again, including maybe right before? Like we said, it all started when he hit me back, right? That unprovoked
Right.
attack that happened right after, there was a terror attack or somebody was shot or something happened in a community, right? And it's a lot of these attacks, which there's not a lot of attacks, but of the attacks, many of them are sort of an indictment of the political class and the security class in Israel to not be providing ample security to the residents of settlements, particularly some of the ones that are more isolated. And
Well, that was something I think that I was very surprised. I was in Samaria last Wednesday, and I didn't realize the level of civilian defense that exists there. And
exactly
I was told that it's necessity. It's not that they really want it. They have no choice because they're not getting that kind of support
correct, it's
from
civilian
the
defense. And in a lot of cases they're organized by the community, right?
right,
So what happens is that, let's say that there's an attempted infiltration. Okay, so now the first responders, the organized first responders, who are essentially civilians, are now chasing a perpetrator, and they chase him all the way back to his territory. Maybe there's an altercation that takes place, and now that's settler violence, right?
right.
Is that settler violence? These are, but again, it's this is the narrative warfare that is being fought by the Palestinian people against the Jews, and the Jews fall for it.
Yeah.
Because they're sensitive, because they want to be a moral people, and that's virtuous. But virtuosity has to also be met with reality,
Yeah.
and the people have to understand the actual realities of the situation. And
Yeah.
it's yeah,
I met this incredible Yossi Dagan, who I'm sure you know. I mean, who's
sure.
who's involved in a lot of, just, making sure that the people there are safe. And it's unbelievable to see how much these citizens, civilians, have to take into their own hands because they have no choice. And how important and crucial and critical it is to the safety and security of Israel. Just, we were sitting up there on this like hilltop. You can see literally from Ashkelon all the way to Tel Aviv. You can see just about everything, just as for just from a sense of security. Anyway, that was unbelievable to me.
I think it's important also to remember what the situation was in Gaza prior to 2005. The Israel had this essentially a five-finger plan of putting settlements inside the Gaza Strip in these various, spread out in these five different areas in order to keep the IDF presence in that area and to protect those communities. Those communities were protecting the entire rest of the country because, as we said before, the Hamas and these terror entities were simply unable to build up the type of military apparatus when the IDF was there. So yes, the settlers are actually providing a buffer zone and providing security to everybody else in Israel.
Yeah. I have one last question for you, and it's the question that everyone here is asking. What else can be done by the diaspora community that is not being done right now? What can we do? We have this sense of helplessness. It's funny because I personally feel like I live in these two worlds, because I just came back from Israel. I felt very helpful there, but now I'm back here, and once again I feel this sense of helplessness, as many diaspora Jews are feeling.
Yeah, I think that it's so important to, as we say in Hebrew, to provide chizuk, for the Jewish community. Many of them, been confused about Israel. Many of them have, bought into the narratives that are being, spread by the pro-Palestinians, pro-Hamas, anti-Israeli, anti-Semites. They've been confused about it. Educate people. Make people understand that Israel is not the problem. Okay, that Israel is the solution. That Israel is the past, the present, and the future of the Jewish people. It is your homeland as much as it is my homeland. It is everybody's. If you're a Jew, the state of Israel is your home. Even if you have a house in Canada or in the United States, Israel's still your home. And to connect to that, to spread that message, share it with others, share the justness of Israel's cause. Come together in unity. Stop seeing divisions between one Jew and the next. Stop seeing divisions between Israel and the North American Jewish communities. Start praying more. Pray for the soldiers. Pray for them. That's, you told me yourself. That's what the soldiers are asking. The soldiers are asking for blessings. They're asking for prayers. Pray for the soldiers. Start saying Tehillim. There's numerous causes that people can give money towards. There's been just an outpouring of support. People buying helmets, vests, bullets, night vision gear, and all kind of things for Israeli soldiers. Certainly, there are families of hostages and those that were killed on October 7th that have to pick up the pieces. In many cases, major breadwinner, the family lost. They're going to need money. There's 200,000 Israelis that are displaced right now. I even heard that soldiers need underwear and socks and things like that. So there's a lot of things that can be done, and also you can support those that are fighting on the information front as well, which is one of the most important arenas, like good causes like JNS and others.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for fighting the good fight. You're fighting a fight for not only for Medinat Yisrael, not only for the state of Israel, but for the Jewish people. It's an uphill battle, and thank you for being on the front lines of that battle, and for taking the time to be here with me today.
You too. Thank you so much.